Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and welcome to Adaptable. Today, we're going to talk about something that I love and that I learned as a Daring Way facilitator with Brene Brown's work, and that's the concept of trying to have the most generous assumption. What that means, we're so quick to judge. We're so fast to find flaws in what other people do. And I think that it ends up creating disconnection in relationships. It creates turmoil in ourselves. It creates resentments. And ultimately, we're not living peacefully as we could be living if we can reduce that inherent judgment that we all have. Think about and consider how you find yourself jumping to conclusions about what they do, their intentions. It's common for us as humans to jump to a quick conclusion about things, but it often leads to misunderstandings and it strains relationships. And so this is where this concept of having the most generous assumption comes in. Like I said, this idea was popularized by a researcher and one of my fierce mentors, Brene Brown. She's an awesome storyteller, and I highly recommend any book that she has written. Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong. Atlas of the Heart is so good. It's the most recent one. It gives us better information about what each emotion does and how our emotions are supposed to show up for the human. And ultimately, this concept of the most generous assumption really tries to encourage us to assume the best in others, even when their actions might suggest otherwise. I can remember when I first learned about this concept, it was really frustrating to me because I started having this internal voice that I was bad or I was judgmental or I was elitist or I thought I was better than others. And it really highlighted how much we do jump to conclusions. And you know that you do that, right? People make choices that you don't agree with, or you could see the 10 chess steps ahead about how things are going to end up. And you see they should pivot or they should course correct because you know that it's, maybe not in their best interest. But a little bit like Mel Robbins' let them theory, it's about recognizing that if we let people make whatever choices they're going to make and not take it personally or not insert ourselves across the lane where it's not our business, and we can just assume that people are really doing the very best that they can with what they have, it's a much better way for us to live. And it may or may not be true, but it's really not our position or our place to decide that for others. And so when we have these, observations of choices that other people make, and we're like, I wouldn't do it that way, and I don't understand why others would not just make those adjustments. They should do it more like I would do, or they should try harder. It puts us in disconnection and it creates just bad emotions and it's bad vibes, universally, and it's not necessary at all. And so Brene Brown teaches us that making the most generous assumption is kind of the best way to lean into people with non-judgment. She describes the fact that people are really doing the very best that they can with what they have. And we can open ourselves up to empathy and connection if we kind of hit the default button on this generous assumption. This doesn't mean that we ignore harmful behavior or we excuse poor choices, but rather we approach situations with a mindset of curiosity and compassion. I wonder why they're acting that way. I wonder what they're doing. Think about driving on a road and someone's pissed off and they cut you off. And, I've seen so many people that they start cussing out the person in the other car. And if you think about the most generous assumption idea, you could say, gosh, I wonder what's going on. I wonder if, they're trying to race to the hospital, or I wonder if, their mom is dying right now. And so they're so disconnected from their self. They're just like not paying attention. And so if we get curious and we show up with a little bit more compassion and we sort of hit that default button, people really are doing the very best that they can with what they're currently going through or what they have. It just sits easier and it doesn't change any outcome except for how you resonate in your own skin. And so I want to talk a little bit about why it's hard for us to make the most generous assumption, because I think if it were easy, we would all just do it. But there's several reasons that this is hard. First, our brains are wired to protect us. And so giving the example of the car situation, if I yell and I get pissed and I'm angry that someone just cuts us off, biologically, our limbic system is going threat, danger. I need to do something to protect myself. And so, if I jump to this angry position because the cortisol that comes from anger gives me the energy I need to fight, there's a, biological reason for this jumping to this negative conclusion to sort of protect myself from potential harm. But the truth is, if I yell, screw off, asshole, in my car, they can't hear me. They're not going to change. I'm now heightened. I'm more alert. I'm likely more aggressive, which might give me an opportunity to make a mistake. Whereas if I go, dang, generous assumption, I wonder what's going on with them. They must really have had a rough morning to be in such a hurry. I hate when I have a day like that. Then I'm more measured. I'm more calm. I'm more in my prefrontal cortex. And so it really serves us to be able to do that. So, that first reason is biologically we're wired to protect ourselves, but our past experiences and our biases, it clouds our judgment. It makes us difficult to see the good in people. We jump to those quick conclusions because of what we've seen or what we've been through, or honestly, where others have fallen short in our life. So, all those things are true. And at the same time, we can train ourselves to make more generous assumptions. It's a practice. And so, I'm hoping that with this show, you even recognize it as an issue in the first place. And then after that, you go, hey, I'm going to pay attention to when I don't do that, when I don't offer, a generous assumption, and I find myself, either dress rehearsing tragedy, or I find myself in like a really critical mindset, or I'm judging others with the biases that I have. So I'm going to give you some tips to kind of get started on changing this and practicing a more generous assumption. And the first of which is like recognizing that we're aware of ourselves. We're going to practice self-awareness. We're going to pay attention to your thoughts and your reactions. So let's say you were typically someone who would, get pissed off when you were driving, when someone would cut you off, and you're hearing this and that resonates with you, or you walk into your house after a really hard day and you're ticked that the kids didn't do their chores, and you're ticked that the dog chewed up something because someone left something out, and you're just immediately in that default kind of angry place. You're hearing this episode right now and you're like, hey, I do that. And we're all guilty of it. That's why I'm talking about it. I mean, we really are. And so first, again, this is like recognizing awareness of self. And you're going to pause and you're going to ask yourself, is there another more generous explanation for what might have happened? And in so doing is kind of the next step where we can cultivate some empathy. We want to try to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And, going back to the example of someone who's driving recklessly or aggressively, I've been there. I've been there where I'm in such a freaking hurry, or my alarm didn't go off, or, I put on my shirt and I was ready to go and I dropped coffee on myself right as I was getting in the car. And so I'm like so frustrated. We've all had those moments. And so kind of trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes, considering what they might be going through, how their experiences could be influencing their behavior and their actions and their choices. I think that the empathy side of things, putting yourself in that role, really softens us. And, the next thing that we want to do is focus on our communication. So if we're unsure about someone's intentions, we can just ask. So, open and honest communication can help us clear up misunderstandings and build trust. When something goes wrong in a way where it's like, for example, thinking about an employee, I might say, hey, I was disappointed that this other thing didn't happen. And I wanted to start with what happened that got in your way to make whatever I asked you to do not take place. And so we can clear up misunderstandings, we can build trust, we can exercise really open communication, and that can help us soften into a generous assumption. And then we really need to reflect on our own behavior. We want to think about times when we might have been misunderstood. How did it feel? Let's say I was late for a deadline. Shoot, today when I was getting ready to film, I realized I forgot a charger that's pretty important. And I'm like, I think about those moments. Like, let's say that my assistant, Taylor, over here, like, let's say she forgot something and I'm frustrated because it's disappointing or whatever. I can reflect on this moment where, like, everyone forgets something, right? Today I forgot this charger and I'm having to have someone bail me out to bring this extension so that I don't run out of battery. So it's those times where you think about your own experiences and try to recognize we've all been misunderstood, and it helps us to remind ourselves that other people deserve that same benefit of the doubt. We're all really doing the very best that we can with what we have given our current circumstances. So if we're applying this and we're trying to adopt this new way of thinking, and we're thinking about applying generous assumptions when possible, we can create more compassionate, understanding relationships. It's not always easy, but it takes practice, it takes reps, and it can become a natural part of how we interact with others. I try to pride myself in, even when I jump to a conclusion or a judgment, I typically grab it, rewind myself back, and I say, hey, I'm really sorry. Let me try that again. Or if I don't catch it and I've got people in my circle of trust that interact with me and they see me up close and personal where I get short or jumpy or where I do things that are maybe not like the most compassionate, if they give me that feedback, I really want to hear it and I want to try to circle back and do it better the next time. So I hope that you find this concept something you want to adopt in your life. I think more generous assumption, more compassion, more communication, reflection on our own selves and our own experiences, dropping into empathy. These are all ways that we can cultivate better relationships and really be in better connection with one another. So give it a try. Give us some feedback in the comments section, what you think about adopting this. And if it's hard for you, I know that it was hard for me to get it started, but it's becoming a lot easier and it's becoming more of a default pathway in my brain because of the reps. So I highly recommend you give it a shot. If you found this episode or discussion helpful, please share it with someone that could benefit. Maybe leave a review or a comment. We appreciate your support. And if you've got some ideas about other things that you'd like to hear about from me, definitely suggest that as well in the comments. So thank you so much for tuning into the episode of Adaptable. I appreciate your viewership. And until next time, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.